Good evening and good to have you with us on this edition of The Last Word. And it's been a busy and hectic day for the Modi government. Portfolios announced by afternoon, and then by evening a lot of the ministers had taken charge of the new ministries. A cabinet meeting was held and big decisions really made, big announcements made for the farmers, especially for the small marginal farmers, also for the kin of martyrs, and even for small-time traders. So the Modi government has gotten straight to work. We decided that this evening we are going to focus on the key portfolios. Now, there's been a shake-up on Raisina Hill on the 4 big portfolios between the North Bloc and the South Bloc. So let's talk about them. Let's speak and discuss about the key challenges for these newly appointed ministers and what could be the way forward for them. And let's begin with Amit Shah, BJP president and now a member of Modi government and the cabinet. He's been given the all-important portfolio of the Home Ministry. Amit Shah will be taking charge most probably tomorrow as the Home Minister. And he, of course, has led the party's gigantic growth that they have seen in the last 5 years. From a party that came to power on a strong Modi wave, they managed to strengthen that further in 2019. And a lot of that credit is actually given to Amit Shah. Now, what can he do as the Home Minister is going to be the big question. Remember, he has a very, very tough stance when it comes to the issues in Northeast, to the issue of illegal immigrants, to the issue of the National Register for Citizens and the Citizen Amendment Bill. Is that going to be one of the big focuses for Amit Shah? He also may be the man who leads for larger policy changes when it comes to Kashmir and the controversial Article 370 which is there. Will that see a change under Amit Shah's leadership is also one of those big questions. The other big face now on Raisina Hill, shifting from North Bloc to the South Bloc, is Rajnath Singh, veteran leader of the BJP, who was earlier the Home Minister, hails from Lucknow in Uttar Pradesh, has now been given the job of a defense minister. And there is a lot on his plate. We have been repeatedly highlighting how when it comes to the equipment, when it comes to the support infrastructure and resources for the defense or our armed forces, a lot has to be done. There was a recent report by the forces themselves that sent the alarm bells ringing about the faulty equipment that was being used, and because of that, the kind of accidents that were taking place. So Rajnath Singh will have to focus on that. He will also have to ensure that Make in India for defense gets to the next level. What else will be his challenge is what we will discuss in just a bit. And the third big phase that I want to discuss today is a diplomat who straight away got into the government and got onto the Raisina Hill. Is S. Shankar, former foreign secretary, a very, very important diplomat in Modi government first term when he was a foreign secretary, and now he will be filling in the boots of Sushma Swaraj. Can he take forward the vision that Narendra Modi has as far as our foreign policy is concerned? What will be the big challenges? What could be the stance towards US and China and Pakistan? And in fact, I want to start with that. Let's begin with the External Affairs Ministry and what we see as the big challenge for our foreign policy for the next 5 years. Let's say good evening to our panelists joining us this evening. I have Nirupama Rao, former ambassador, joining us this evening. Shakeup Datta, South Asia editor for Asia Times. Manu Pabi, senior editor with Economic Times. Talmiz Ahmed, also a former diplomat. Maruf Raza, strategic affairs expert and of course a consulting editor to our network. And Sangeet Kumar Ragi, a political analyst. Ms. Rao, I'm going to come to you first. In fact, in one of your roles, it was Mr. Shankar who then succeeded you. What is your own sense? Is he the right man to take Narendra Modi's foreign policy vision forward? Nirupama Rao. Mr. Rao, good evening. Can you hear me? Okay, we're going to go to her in just a bit. Let me take that question across to Talmiz Ahmed. Talmiz Ahmed, what is your view? What does Shankar bring on the table?
I think that that disappointment is extremely appropriate. Dr. Jaishankar has extraordinary capacity. He also enjoys the confidence of the Prime Minister. He has personal experience of China and the United States. These are going to be priority issues for us. So personally, I commend the Prime Minister for this appointment. It is a very unexpected appointment, but I think extremely appropriate. And this is in terms of the challenges that we will be facing over the next couple of years.
So, you know, in the first 5 years of the Modi government, if we see, when it comes to Pakistan, the policy, we started off on a friendlier note. We tried to build bridges with them. Then there were a series of terror attacks that happened, and we went back to the policy of saying, well, there are not going to be any talks unless there is terror. Now, there is Imran Khan there, Prime Minister Modi here. Do you see that perhaps one more time we will make an effort? We've just got news that the Indian Air Force has, removed all the restrictions from our airspace. Could there be more coming our way?
I think Pakistan will always be a major challenge for any government in Delhi. The problem is not the leadership, the Prime Minister there and the Prime Minister here. The problem that we face is with regard to the Pakistani armed forces. They have adopted terror and jihadi terror as a matter of state policy. Unless that undergoes a very fundamental change, I can't see any improvement in our bilateral relationship, regardless of who is the Prime Minister in Islamabad. So I think with all the goodwill that we might have and all the deep interest that we might have, I think until they stop supporting terrorism as an instrument of state policy, I think that we will have a difficult time.
Ms. Nirupama Rao, good evening to you. What do you think Mr. Jaishankar brings on the table? A diplomat who's now become the minister in the same ministry. What's your view?
Well, thank you for having me on your show. As I've said before, the choice of Dr. Jaishankar as the Minister of External Affairs is an inspired choice by Prime Minister Modi. And I'm sure the decision must have been taken from many angles. One, of course, is the fact that as a diplomat, as a lifelong diplomat, Dr. Jaishankar brings a great deal of value addition to being Minister for External Affairs. He spent decades in the Foreign Service, has handled very complex assignments, has handled delicate, sensitive relationships that India has with the rest of the world, big and small, and he enjoys the trust and the confidence of the Prime Minister. What we will have to look for is, of course, coordination between the Minister of External Affairs and the Ministry as a whole, and the Office of PMO and the Office of the National Security Advisor. And with Mr. Amit Shah as Home Minister, I'm sure the domestic and external aspects of security will be closely coordinated, I'm sure better coordinated than before, one can only hope, and that will redound to the good of the nation.
In fact, one interesting aspect is, Ms. Rao, which is always said about the Modi government's handling of foreign policy, is that it's primarily been Narendra Modi. He's the one who's traveled across the world, who's visited the nations and really led the changes in ties. It wasn't Sushma Swaraj who was at the helm of foreign policy. It was Narendra Modi in the first term. Now, with a trusted lieutenant becoming the minister, do you see that changing a little bit? Perhaps he is going to give more, more space to Jaishankar to be the face.
Well, that could very well be the case. I think in the case of Mrs. Swaraj, of course, her health was a factor, and I think that sort of slowed her down. She did do a considerable amount of traveling, but I suppose, as it has been with most administrations, with most governments, when the Prime Minister undertakes a visit abroad, there's a certain elevation of level which is obvious to everybody. And he, as the head of government, in many ways, I believe, becomes a very serious interlocutor for other heads of state and government. So the visibility and the prominence that these visits get are far more than what a visit of the Minister of External Affairs would have. In the case of Ambassador Dr. Jaishankar, I'm sure that he will be far more active in terms of the trips he makes abroad than his predecessor was. But that, I don't believe, will take away from the overall position that the Prime Minister obviously has when it comes to the conduct of India's relations with foreign countries. So it'll be a mix. I think there will be a lot more footfalls, let's say, of the Minister of External Affairs going abroad, undertaking important missions. But in many ways, I think the ultimate responsibility will lie with the Prime Minister and the decisions he takes.
Yes, I do agree with you. Of course, when it comes to Mr. Jaishankar, not only did he work closely on the nuclear pact with United States, he's been our ambassador to United States, he's been our ambassador to China. So he's effectively handled very key parts of our policy in his career tenure as a diplomat. Now, how does that translate into when he becomes a minister is going to be interesting. I think the only other example that I remember of of our times is when Mr. Manmohan Singh literally graduated and became finance minister. Shakeup, what is your view? Does it look like there is a sense, Mr. Modi saying that I have done the initial legwork for the first 5 years, now I'm going to put my trusted people in home, in defense, in external affairs, who can share a larger portion of this burden?
Well, I look at it with this is definitely Prime Minister Modi's stamp through and through, and I think he's putting his stamp in a manner where he's going to continue leading from the front on the foreign policy issues, but he's also gotten a man I think has explicit trust in him. And Dr. Jaishankar has been has very closely worked with Prime Minister Modi. But what we also have to look at it is that this will definitely mean a major shake-up in our national security architecture in some ways. Because if you look at what happened in the earlier term, the National Security Advisor played a major role, whether it came to defense, whether it came to foreign affairs, whether it came to home affairs. And in some ways, he was the front man for Prime Minister Modi and tying up all the nitty-gritties, etc. The fact that they have brought in a former foreign secretary who in some ways was junior to the National Security Advisor and has brought him in as a full cabinet minister will completely change things. And I think that can also be seen as an indication of how the Prime Minister is thinking, where the overt securitization of our foreign policy might go down a bit, and where now a seasoned diplomat will take over and go back to classic kind of diplomacy which was not seen or probably not wanted in the first term. But also a slight nuance that I would like to add to this is that this is the first time we are seeing a former foreign secretary taking over as the external affairs minister. Now, we keep being very not so kind to politicians, but politicians, because of the nature of their work and their public persona, they bring a certain kind of imagination to the job. Whether a dyed-in-the-wool, hardcore bureaucrat diplomat who has worked in the system for all his life, whether he will be able to bring in that kind of imagination which a politician can do is something that will remain to be seen, which is why I still think that this is still Prime Minister Modi who's putting in a very, very trusted person in a very key job who will now be part of the Cabinet Committee on Security, but he's still going to be playing the first and foremost role in diplomacy.
Okay, Mr. Ragi, what is your view? Do you agree that there is a trusted lieutenant who's been made a minister, but it will still be Prime Minister Modi who takes the lead when it comes to foreign policy?
I think that even during the first tenure of the Prime Minister Modi, we were talking about that like Pandit Nehru, the foreign policy is being guided by none else but the Prime Minister. Here also we have seen that despite the fact that the Sushma Swaraj was the foreign minister of the country, but the calls were always made by the decisions, crucial decisions were always made by the Prime Minister. And here in this case also, certainly the chemistry between the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary was very good. and he enjoys the confidence of the Prime Minister. And given the team that I see, the Defense Minister as Rajnath Singh and Amit Shah as the Home Minister, I think that it will be a wonderful team in times to work. The only problem, as one of the panelists noted, that the coordination between the National Security Advisor, Mr. Doval, and the newly appointed Foreign Secretary.
Yes.
I don't find that it was too much securitization of the foreign policy in last domain. It was actually the securitization or non-securitization depends on the situations. So India faced that kind of issues vis-a-vis China or Pakistan. That is why we find that we define our foreign policy that way. But it was not driven by securitization right from the beginning, because the initiative of the Prime Minister right from the beginning was to bring a cordial relationship between the neighboring states. So it was not a very aggressive posturing on part of Mr. Modi in the beginning. But as the things went by, gradually Mr. Modi realized that the real politics lay somewhere else, and therefore the Prime Minister had to take some tough decision vis-a-vis China and also Pakistan. Here in this situation, I think that the challenges are definitely different in the second tenure, because they have to deal with aggressive China on the one hand and also build a new relationship that is already on its way with United States of America. Certainly both Mr. Prime Minister and Jaishankar has tilt towards United States of America, and therefore it is to be seen how they negotiate also the relationship with Russia and maintain a cordial relation with Russia. That would be the interesting things to see.
Okay, so two of you have very lightly treaded on one aspect, and let me pick that up and see if Mr. Maroof wants to come in on that. The fact of the matter is, with Narendra Modi, there is one NSA who's also not a professional politician, a career politician. There is also now a external affairs minister who's also a career diplomat, not a politician, and two of them are extremely strong figures, Maroof, and they have a lot of experience when it comes to China or Pakistan and United States and the other bigger nations. Do you think that could be an interesting balancing act that Mr. Modi will have to do between these two? Maroof, I believe there's a problem with your audio connection there. I'm so sorry, and I'm going to try and fix it as soon as possible. I will come back to you. Manu wants to come in. Manu Pabi, go ahead, please.
Yeah, if I can answer that question, see, I think the way that things have shaped out is that they're separating a lot of things which were, in the past being done by one person. So the way that you remember in the past 4 years, there's been a massive change in the way in which the NSA's office operated. The NSCS, the NSA Secretariat, has become a big body now. It has, I think, at least 3 deputy NSAs. It has a military advisor. They have a huge team there. I think the idea that this government has in place is that, in case there is a priority area in which the PM himself wants to intervene, or in which the government thinks it has to go forward, they have an NSCS set up which can do it. But there's a lot of other work in, say, the Defense Ministry, the Ministry of External Affairs, which does not require that specific focus on things. So that's what they are doing. So I think Rajnath, for example, as a defense minister, is a very strong figure. He's probably the most experienced minister they have. He carries a lot of weight. So a lot of the things which are, in the past have languished or not been able to be done properly in the defense ministry, because they have had 4 ministers in the past 5 years, he can deliver as a strong heavyweight there. But say operational issues, there's continuity in that. Mr. Ajit Doval, who's sitting there, he's worked on intelligence, he's worked on mating intelligence and operations together, and he'll continue to do that. And Mr. Jaishankar's entry there also is a symbol of continuity in in the terms of focus areas of the Prime Minister. So I think we are looking at a very interesting combination of bureaucrats / professionals and politicians, and their roles could possibly be divided. It's not that they have to overlap. So I don't see much scope for overlapping and tension between those two entities. I think the way they will structure in the coming days and weeks the areas of responsibility, I think it could actually work very much in favor of the armed forces of larger national interest.
Okay, do we have Mr. Maruf Raza's audio back? Okay, so Maruf, the question was to you as well. How do you see this whole combination? Please? Yes, go ahead, Maruf.
Okay, if you can hear me, first I want to compliment all your guests. They've actually brought out a number of issues which really sum up Mr. Jaishankar's personality. I just want to take this forward into 3 or 4 areas. The first is that if Mr. Modi was looking for somebody outside the political fraternity to basically help him drive the foreign policy to which he has worked very hard towards and laid the foundations of a number of arrangements which are both Ambassador Nirupama Rao and Mr. Talmiz Ahmed will agree, and so will the other 2 guests, that which were of course put together by his predecessors, but quite literally energized by Prime Minister Modi. And to that extent, Jaishankar was part of that team. People also tell me that because Mr. Jaishankar is articulate even in good Hindi, there were a number of discussions they used to have very quickly together when they were dealing with some of the foreign top-level meetings, which helped iron out issues and get decisions made. So there is a chemistry between them. The second aspect is that Mr. Ajit Doval, his enormous competence notwithstanding, his enormous influence on Indian security and foreign policy notwithstanding, was really stretched. He was running from one meeting to another all over the world and having to deal with a number of issues now of late being handed over to him as part of the Ministry of Defence's brief, such as the Defence Planning Committee, where you went into purchases of weapon systems, etc., which the NSAs in the past had not done. So quite clearly his job needed to be trimmed down a bit, and I think Mr. Jaishankar will help do that. And so will Mr. Rajnath coming in as a strong Raksha Mantri, and we've had people of great standing who have in the past also been defense ministers, like Pranab Mukherjee, who was External Affairs Minister, Finance Minister, and one of the oldest and longest serving hands in the Congress government. So, let's not see this Mr. Rajnath's move from home to defense as a bit of a downgrade. And the third thing is that Mr. Amit Shah having come in is quite literally, I mean, if you want to know how India is run, it is the Home Ministry. So there is, and those who are arguing that Amit Shah is going to only focus on the Northeast or Kashmir issue, he is going to have his hands full, and the Home Ministry's job at the best of times is something which you don't receive compliments for.
Okay, so you know what, Maruf, if I can just come in there. Yes, because I do want to get to the Amit Shah's role in just a bit.
Allow me to make.
Yes, no, I'm just saying because I want to come to Amit. Okay, go ahead.
Allow me to just make 3 quick points. Allow me to make 3 quick points on foreign policy, which I think will be Mr. Jaishankar's biggest challenge. One is to get more investments into India if Mr. Modi's 75 point for 75 years is going to materialize, because you need money from outside for various development projects, etc. And I think Mr. Jaishankar is familiar with that. He'll be able to do that, starting with the G20 summit, which 75% of the world's top money holding economies are going to be part of that. The second challenge for Mr. Jaishankar is going to be to ensure that the energy and the West Asian diplomacy, where 6 million or more Indians are obviously staying there, and Mr. Talmiz Ahmed is very familiar with that, is a big challenge to get all the West Asian countries to continue to engage with India and make sure our energy supplies, particularly with America raising tensions with Iran, energy supplies remain undisturbed. And the third and big challenge for Mr. Jaishankar is how to now deal with China. Please understand that all border issues or foreign policy issues, and Madam Nirupama Rao has also been ambassador to China, are issues that are already there. But the big challenge is, how do you go from 4G to 5G? China is pushing for Huawei to come in. America wants other companies to come in. And that's your big challenge. And how much are you going to engage with China on trade and electronics and microchip related issues? And finally, let us not give Pakistan too much importance. The lesser we engage with Pakistan, the more we ignore them, the more we can get on with the business of foreign policy.
I completely agree with you on the last point for sure, Maroof. Let's not give too much attention to Pakistan and get, obsessed so much that as if that's the only part of our foreign policy. And I think even the Modi government in those 5 years has ensured that that's not what it is limited to. Let's come to the second aspect very quickly, and you've briefly touched upon it. Manu, I want to come back to you on the defense aspect. There are so many issues that we have spoken about, whether it's upgrading the equipment, whether it's even increasing the number of soldiers that we have in our forces. There is a lot that is on the plate. What, according to you, will be the biggest challenge for Rajnath?
See, I think he will have challenges pretty much mapped out for him in three broad areas. One is finances. What has happened in the Ministry of Defense in the past 5 years is that we've had 4 defense ministers, different, small terms. Parikar had the longest term, tried a lot of good reforms, had to go before he could implement them. So in terms of money allocated, I think Rajnath, being a strong minister, can perhaps get more money to come in. And money is not just for, paying salaries, it's for modernization. And there are some very key modernization projects which I think he will be able to drive through. Secondly, so it's a funny thing, Rajnath was actually the envy of the armed forces when he was the home minister, because they saw him come in and do so much for the paramilitary in terms of humanitarian things like increase of allowances, better equipment, say pensions, or even compensation towards families, which really endeared him to a lot of the people in the Ministry of Defense. Soldiers used to say that look at this man, we wish he was there to help us in the same factor. The third biggest challenge that he's going to have is going to be on this very tricky subject, but very important, on Make in India, but Make in India with the private sector. Because I think the last government treaded that. They came very close to it with the offsets, with getting the big defense companies to start manufacturing. But the Rafale scandal, I think, and Ambani's name getting into it totally derailed that. So he has 2-3 very sticky, challenging issues. But given his nature, his nature and his background of being a strong leader, I think he will be able to drive through a lot of these. But in terms of say operations, in terms of real activity, like what's going to happen on the border, do we be strong and aggressive in China right now, or should we loosen up in Pakistan a bit? I think these calls are still going to be made at the very top level by the Prime Minister himself, implemented through the National Security Advisor. That's going to remain. But yes, I think Rajnath has a very, very interesting time ahead for him. The only caveat is that he retains the ministry, because remember, a lot of bureaucrats and the officers will tell you that losing 4 ministers or 3 ministers in 5 years did put defense priorities back a bit. So I think they are all hoping that he will stay as the defense minister for a full term.
Yes, in fact, that was one of my initial thoughts as well when we saw that change and Nirmala Sitharaman being moved to financing. Oh, one more change for the defense ministry. They've seen so much of it in the last term. But help us understand, Mr. Ahmed, how does the coordination between these ministries on the Raisina Hill work, whether it's between the external and the defense and home? And do you think that the current team has been chosen keeping that in mind, that it will be a better, well-oiled machine?
Interministerial coordination is the bane of government service. It is extremely poor. Ministries tend to be very jealous about their domain. They don't like to share information, and they certainly don't like to coordinate. This is not necessarily to be done at ministerial level or at the cabinet level. This has to be done at the functional level. Joint secretaries should be in touch with each other and coordinating policy. This just does not happen. And it is now very, very difficult to ensure that it takes place. We need a new mindset in this regard. People have to get out of the bureaucratic groove and start thinking that they are serving the nation rather than their little division or their ministry. It's going to be a long way. But I think that certain positives are already in the offing. I think the first term the Prime Minister used was to project his, his persona as well as a broad vision of what he has in terms of India's long-term goals. I think that has been largely achieved. And therefore now he is setting back and he is putting together a very strong team in which he has a certain confidence. He has personal confidence. So whether you have Jaishankar in the Foreign Office, or you have Mr. Amit Shah, or Mr. Rajnath Singh, or Mr. Doval, these are all people who are tried and tested and who enjoy his confidence. I personally feel there will be a sea change in the functioning of government. And it will be led by him, but he doesn't need to do the frenetic activity of running all over the world and running all over the country as he did earlier, because he needed to project himself and he needed to put across a message of what India was going to be all about. I think that has been largely achieved. Now we are into the real challenge. The challenge of getting into the detail and of safeguarding our interests in a changing environment and in a difficult environment as well.
One more view from Ms. Rao on this before we move on to discussing a bit more about the Home Ministry and Amit Shah being part of the cabinet. Ms. Rao, what, according to you, will be the biggest challenge now for Mr. Jaishankar, and the entire team?
Sorry, I lost you there.
No, I'm just asking you, what do you think will be Jaishankar's biggest challenge?
Well, the situation in the neighborhood, the relationships, the big relationships, China particularly. Pakistan, I agree. I mean, there is so much more in the world than Pakistan for us to deal with. But there is a certain fixation on Pakistan policy within the country. And domestic concerns often intersect with the larger arena of foreign policy, as we've seen time and time again over the last few years. In terms of the coordination that some of your earlier speakers discussed, I know from personal experience that coordination between the Ministry of External Affairs and the Ministry of Defense particularly, and the Ministry of Home Affairs to some extent, is extremely vital. It's not just the heads of divisions that need to keep in touch with each other. I'm talking of the joint secretary level officers. But I think you need a larger ecosystem where coordination, where more collegial decisions are taken, where there is more oversight in ensuring that this coordination happens at all levels. And that is where I believe this decision to place Dr. Jaishankar in the Ministry of External Affairs, and of course Mr. Amit Shah in the Home Ministry and Mr. Rajnath Singh in the Defense Ministry, does augur well. But that doesn't take away from the fact that there are many, many priority issues to which the government will have to give time. And the China policy is one of them. And there, I think, coordination between the Ministry of External Affairs and the Ministry of Defense, I know from personal experience, is most vital with the services headquarters, for instance, not just with the civilian bureaucracy of the Ministry of Defense. So we are going to have interesting times ahead. But I think this concept of a collegium,
yes,
a kind of coordinated level of decision-making, perhaps has not really panned out in the manner in which you're seeing today,
yes,
with the formation of this cabinet. So one hopes for the best, one hopes for better coordination and more focused decision-making. But that also, I'd also like to mention the question of human resources. And we've spoken ad nauseum, I think, over the last few years about the shortage of manpower in the Ministry of External Affairs. We need many, many more hands on deck. Our diplomats, our bureaucrats are overworked, overburdened, and definitely you need much more resource addition. I'm not just talking of financial resources.
Right.
I'm talking of human resources, capable, specialist human resources.
Well, considering that he himself is a diplomat, one can hope that he takes this battle to the next level and ensures that there's some changes which are made and some respite is brought in. Shaukat wanted to make a point. Go ahead, please, Shaukat Datta.
Just two quick points. One is that if you look when Prime Minister Modi first came to power in 2014 and when he's coming to power in 2019, it's a very different world that we are looking at. In my view, it's a far more complex world from an international relations perspective. You have somebody, in his earlier term, he had somebody like President Obama in the White House. Now you have President Trump, who is facing his own challenges, but he's also fairly unpredictable. The kind of support that India could depend on from the Americans is probably not as robust as it was a little earlier. Now, let me give you the other example. I mean, today, the Chinese and the Americans are in the middle of a massive trade war. And the fallout of that, and we are looking at it when it comes to issues like how to deal with rare earth minerals, etc. We are already seeing a lot of complexities because of the tension between these two great powers, which is beginning to affect us. Also, what's happening in Iran and the fact that 11% of our oil is no longer going to come from Iran under very favorable conditions, and we'll have to look for our energy basket elsewhere at a higher price, etc., are challenges that are very complex. And the second part is, let us look at it, and this is where this issue of defense and external affairs becomes very, very interesting. Now, India needs to buy 126 multi-role, medium-role combat aircraft, and the F-16 has been a major player in that. And from what I understand, Dr. Jaishankar has always been a little favorable towards the Americans as well as the F-16 as an aircraft. But after Balakot, India is a country which now claims it shot down an F-16.
Correct.
In a situation like this, clearly trying to buy an F-16 under those circumstances would be almost like political suicide. So how do you balance these, different kinds of pulls and pressures is where the key part of how this team comes together will remain to be seen.
Okay, so we will wait and watch out for that. Let me go across to Sangeet Kumar Ragi on the point that Maruf raised earlier when it comes to Amit Shah and how many believe that this signals a stronger, a harder approach to Northeast and for Kashmir. Mr. Ragi, do you believe that those two will be the key focus areas for Amit Shah?
I don't think that a home minister is to deal with only the Northeast or the Kashmir. I think that this is a disproportionate assessment and not very honest assessment about the role that the home minister is likely to play. I think that there are many challenges. The home minister has to maintain a cordial federal relations that has to be maintained by the home minister. So that is also going to be a big challenge. Yes, Naxalism, separatist activities in the Northeast and also in Kashmir. Certainly as a president of the Bharatiya Janata Party, he boldly talked about abrogation of Article 35 and 370. So these are the crucial issues. Again, the issue of sending back the Bangladeshi infiltrators in India and having a national register of citizenship. These are some challenging and pressing issues before the home minister. And I think that given the competence of Amit Shah, who is always seen as a hard taskmaster, I think that these things would be possible. So core issues of the BJP right from the Jansangh has been some of these issues associated with, and therefore I think that Prime Minister has chosen him to deliver on
because the intent and this has been made clear earlier as well, is to not just, for example, not just have NRC and implement it in an efficient manner for Assam, but also take it up to across the country and to other states as well. And Amit Shah has made it very clear multiple times that this is something that is very important to him, Maruf. So then why is it that you believe that perhaps will not become the focus? Because he's been BJP president, he's repeatedly spoken about illegal immigrant problem and the NRC, or when it comes to BJP's policy on Kashmir, where they obviously couldn't do much in the first term.
Tanvi, firstly, let me give a correction. I did not say that will only be his focus, that is Kashmir and the Northeast.
No, you
I
said
started
that
off
won't
by
be.
saying when you're Home
Yes.
Minister of India, you're more or less running the country.
Yes.
Yeah, I said it won't be because, I mean, there will be a certain amount of attention and time he will have to give to it, as Mr. Rajnath Singh did and all previous home ministers have had to. But the fact is that it is other people in the media over the last 124-hour period who've been going on and on about with Amit Shah coming in. Amit Shah is going to be the new Sardar Patel and he's going to deal with the stone throwers and pelters with a firm hand, etc., etc. Please also remember that it was Sardar Patel who had Article 370 emplaced in the constitution when Pandit Nehru was traveling abroad. So to say that, you know, Sardar Patel, for all his merits, was the man who got nothing wrong, which is today being questioned by the entire BJP elite, they must do a little homework. The fact is that Mr. Amit Shah's basket is already full. He is going to come in as Home Minister and he's got a party line in which he has to address a number of issues that are of greater priority to his party than only just being engaged with the Kashmir issue, Northeast or the Naxal issue. Certainly the Home Minister of India would do well to devote more time to the Naxal issue because that is a problem which even Manmohan Singh twice in his 2 tenures mentioned that it's India's biggest security threat and then forgot about it. The fact of the matter is that is clearly under the Home Ministry, whereas Kashmir and the Northeast has the Army, the Foreign Ministry and various other ministries involved. So there is a security challenge that he has to address, but there are bigger issues that he needs to address. I also want to bring out 2 other quick points. One is that, you know, Mr. Jaswant Singh, the very distinguished former foreign minister and partly at one stage defense minister and later finance minister, once mentioned that defense and foreign affairs are 2 sides of the same coin. So as Madam Nirupama now will agree, who has been our foreign secretary before, an ambassador to various countries, that there is a lot of requirement for inter-ministerial cooperation, at least in South Block, if not across the road in North Block and South Block. But the thing is that when I once casually mentioned to Mr. Jaishankar that how would he look at the shortage of foreign service personnel in the IFS, and the Indian Foreign Service is smaller than that of Singapore, but see the kind of role we want to play and see the resources we have. So I completely agree with what Ms. Nirupama Rao has said, but Mr. Jaishankar's response was, if I remember correctly, that, you know, it depends on what you are counting as part of the foreign service. So many other countries project much larger people who are even clerical staff as part of their foreign service and we don't. But the foreign service certainly needs to expand, certainly needs lateral infusion, certainly needs intellectual pluralism to get out of the box and look at the various challenges from a non-diplomatic, bureaucratic perspective. But also simultaneously the Raksha Mantralaya coincidentally needs to trim down. You know, let me give you the example of the Indian Army. Almost 87% of the Army's budget just goes in salaries and pensions. So you are left with virtually no money to buy the equipment, whether it is 126 fighter aircrafts, or it is the Navy's requirement of 100+ helicopters, or it is the requirement of the Air Force for having various other kind of airlift capability. The issue is that the armed forces, we need to take a real serious approach, how much we need to put in terms of national security, what kind of wars are we going to fight in the future, how much do we need to equip our forces for? Is it a 45-day war or a 7-day war, which is what the world will allow you today? So there is a lot of thinking and rejuggling and restructuring that needs to take place, and both defense and foreign ministries are going to get involved, but there has to be a lot of interaction with the home ministry also, because, you know, the paramilitary takes on a lot of work, but gets 1/10 of the budget of the armed forces or even lesser. So how do you distribute the limited resources we have? And there Madam Nirmala Sitharaman, who had a problem as a Raksha Mantri in winning the confidence of the services, would now with her understanding may be able to juggle with money and give more money to address issues. But is it that what we need to do, or do we need to draw money from outside, which will be Jaishankar's big challenge, to make sure the money is readily available in India for various projects that we need to make India a better country economically, socially, etc. You know, can't keep printing notes from the Reserve Bank.
Okay, in fact, let me go across to Manu on that aspect, because we've repeatedly spoken about what the armed forces need, especially in terms of the equipment upgradation that is needed, the amount of money that has to go in. Do you think, Manu, is there a sense on ground that now that Nirmala Sitharaman has gone to Finance Ministry, perhaps you will get a larger share? Everybody will have to go to the lady, asking for more funds, ahead of the budget. Will she be more understanding of what the defense forces need?
No, I hope she is, because she's seen what's happened here. But I agree fully with Maruf on the bigger point is that we need to cut down on armed forces. We just can't afford a fourth of the size. And I think Nirmala, hopefully, when she's gone through this ministry, it's a very tough political call, cutting down jobs, redistributing them. It's difficult, but perhaps she's been here, she can see it, she knows it needs to be done, because the only way to pump in money here is by reducing the burden that you have in terms of salaries and pensions. That said, I think what the armed forces really need right now is, of course, the money, but they also need a structural change. And that's why I want to come to the Amit Shah question, which you posed earlier. Amit Shah's role is not just security. I mean, as the Home Minister, I think a lot of his work, maybe his time, will go into the bigger mandate, which is restructuring the way this government is going to govern. And that is going to be, changing ministries, changing how ministries function, restructuring roles and responsibilities. And I think if he, especially because he'll be dealing with states there and with multiple ministries and laws, I think he will be useful to the Prime Minister on that. And the Defence Ministry needs to change fundamentally, in the sense of, you have a defence production department right now, you have a defence procurement division, you have the armed forces. They all need to be restructured, and we have to move towards a new system of how other countries work. You have to move towards jointness, you have to move towards moving out production from ministry to, say, heavy industries. You need to move a special division on exports. So these are bigger things, challenges, I think, which perhaps a stronger CCS. This CCS is very strong, and it can take some very strong decisions.
Yes, actually,
without
I'm sorry I'm coming in and interrupting you here, Manu.
This is a very strong government.
I completely agree with you, and that seems to be the sense that everybody is giving right now, that this CCS is a very strong and a very cohesive one, and that the equations within them work very well for them to come together and take some really, tough and clear decisions. It's been a great panel, and I had a great conversation tonight. And what will be interesting, of course, is if actually the few proposals which are already there about streamlining our armed forces and cutting them down and making them more efficient are actually pulled off by this government, and actually if Mr. Rajnath Singh is able to implement them. But Amit Shah, Rajnath Singh, Nirmala Sitharaman and S. Jaishankar, the four key ministries and the four key ministers who've been selected. There is a lot that they have to do in the next 5 years. We've only discussed some of the challenges that they will have and some of the issues that they must address immediately. Of course, in the coming months and years, we will keep bringing you more of that stuff. Let's just say that one can only hope four of them work together for our security internally, externally, and of course for a better, more successful foreign policy. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.